So, tell me about the Quaddy Regional Land Trust.
Sure.
What they're all about. And
Sure, be glad to.
Okay.
You know, I've been up here since 1980, so I'm a newcomer here. And
That's a long time.
right, it is getting to be a long time. I knew as soon as I got here I didn't want to live anywhere else. And there's some just.
Where did you come from?
I had been living actually in England before then, but I was raised in Massachusetts, where half the people in Maine, started out. I moved here and just realized right away this was a unique place. There were some really special things about this area, including the communities and the people. In fact, they still were connected to the land. They had a sense of their outdoors. But I also realized starting in the mid-'80s that there was a lot of development pressure. That, if you recall then, there was quite a boom. We had the Patent Corporation coming around buying up old saltwater farms, subdividing them. Not a lot of building, but a tremendous fragmentation of many of the old coastal properties. And it seemed really important to try to protect some of what was most special in this area. Development's not a bad thing, but unrestrained development, well, that's what those of us who moved up here mostly moved away from.
How far do you cover?
Well, we cover an area from Machias to Calais and from the coast into Route 9, more or less. It includes Cobscook Bay and its watershed, the American side of the Passamaquoddy Bay shoreline, down the Bold Coast down to Machias, Englishman Bay.
Quite a
It's a
large
pretty big
stretch.
region. We're a regional land trust for a good reason.
Now, how did it start? Did you start it?
Well, I
you part of
didn't.
it?
I was part of the starting.
Yeah.
I and others were looking for some way to conserve land, and Maine Coast Heritage Trust at the time was encouraging local groups to form in response to the development pressures they were facing. They didn't want to be a local land trust all up and down the coast, but they were encouraging groups. So I and a few other people, after about 2 years of pulling ourselves together, said, yeah, this is something we want to do. It's a positive, long-term thing we can do for the community.
How did the
for our
locals respond to that?
I think initially with puzzlement. Land trust
Because
is
this is Maine.
It's Maine, and
They're a
also
little different here.
we knew this was a new beast for at least for this part of Maine. People had heard of we were told at first, you must be a bank because you have the word trust.
Right.
You must be a bunch of hippies because there had been these so-called hippie land trusts back in the 60s, communally owned land. It took us a long time to explain what we were really about. And I think that's a process that still goes on. But more and more, as we have things to show for our work, people can see what we're about. And that's the big thing.
And this is part of it.
This is part of it. This
So
is a
you
major
go around
project.
and you try to buy parcels of property that the trust feels are important to the area for longevity purposes.
For a long
They don't get developed. Right?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
For a long time, we mainly worked with landowners who wanted themselves to restrict the future use of their land through conservation easements.
Yep.
And for for a considerable amount of time, we weren't in a position to buy anything. So we received a number of donated easements, and then we began to receive donated parcels of land. A couple of wild islands, a little piece in Calais that was part of a wetlands mitigation project that we could keep as public open space. And we began to see that easements are a wonderful tool where the landowner wants to keep the land, pass it on to the next generation, or even sell it with restrictions. But there's some cases where they either don't want to do that or can't afford to do that, need to sell. And lately, in the last few years, we've begun to take on capital campaigns to try to purchase really critical lands. And this is our second major effort here.
What about the concept of a land bank?
A land bank has never been tried here as such. As I understand it, a land bank is where the town uses its own resources or pulls in monies to help
from each real estate transaction.
That's right.
A percentage of that
That's right.
is put on top of that transaction,
That's right.
and then it goes to the land bank. And guys like you
can then use it.
Can use that to buy the parcels that are available.
I think a land bank is an ideal way for a community to recognize that it has a stake in its own future. Development is going to happen, particularly on the coast, but also on our lakes and rivers. And a land bank would allow people to have resources to acquire land when it comes available. My understanding is that Maine currently does not allow a local option property tax or a local option transfer tax on real estate. Okay. So the idea has not come to a point in Maine where a community can do that. Communities, though, can, if they want, dedicate funds to acquiring land. I was talking to somebody from Ipswich, Mass. the other day. They have just voted a bond issue of $10 million for one town in Massachusetts. That's as much as is proposed for the whole Land for Maine's future program in the next bond issue for the whole state. So you can see, of course, land costs a lot more down there, but you can see the commitment of that one town to being sure that they're going to protect as much as they can of what is still worth protecting. Of course, I think that providing open space and recreational opportunities for the next generation is valuable, but a lot of people want to know what is it here. Right. One thing that I can say very specifically, we have, the Quoddy Regional Land Trust is coordinating a project called Cobscook Trails, and that uses land, not currently land that we own, but land that's owned by a variety of state and federal agencies and other conservation groups. And the trails that are there are identified and brought into a network that's given a Cobscook Trails logo. That's what this hat is all about. We have a trail steward and we have a trail guide. And I can tell you that people identify with those trails. And they come here. Of course, it's a huge resource for local people who want to be able to get out on the land. But it's also a huge draw for people who want to visit. They maybe stay another day. Yes. The bed and breakfast says, hey, have you seen this leaflet or this booklet? They'll discover that there's, some obscure corners and wonderful little out-of-the-way places that have trails on them. They go out there, they fall in love with the area, they come back. We hope they support us in our work. Sure. They maybe look for, land that they want. Right. And those are people who come into the area really valuing, I think, what it is, rather than just wanting to transform it into the sort of place they left.
Okay.
That's one straightforward, economic benefit of conservation land. Of course, there are the others that are, help protect the clean water. People recognize around here, especially if they've worked on the water, that that's a resource that depends on the water quality. The freshwater resources around here depend on the aquifers not being polluted and so on. Open space, undeveloped land.